there's a lot of desire in a job ad. What is it that they seem to want? The way that that gets articulated may or may not line up exactly with your skills, but if you can understand a little bit of the psychology of what they're looking for, what need they're trying to fill, then you can think about what you've done and how you would be able to meet that need. And I think that customization gets talked about a lot. How do you customize your cover letter for every job or whatever? But I think the first step is really understanding the audience.
Welcome to Gradschooled, a podcast about how to organize your genius for greater professional opportunities and a thriving life. As a high achiever, creative, and multifaceted person, you are always on the brink of your next big project or career move. So each episode, we discuss how to plan, pivot, or progress toward your next big move with confidence. Welcome to Gradschooled. I am your host, Dr. Fatima Williams. It was such a pleasure to sit down and speak with Katina Rogers. I learned so much from her. I think she teaches us a lot about staying in discovery and being in a space of allowing yourself to follow your interests, even when you're not sure exactly where they're going to lead. She walks us through her career path, going from a graduate student with a doctorate degree in the humanities and how she really transitioned through her professional career in philanthropy, as well as in education and other points in between. So we learn a lot from Katina. Katina is also the Futures Initiative co-director at the Graduate Center at City University of New York, also known as CUNY. We learn a lot from her. I cannot wait for you to just hear about her example and also about her new book, Putting the Humanities PhD to Work, Thriving in and Beyond the Classroom. Whether you're in the humanities or you're just trying to figure out what comes next for you, you will learn something special from Katina. So here she is. I am so excited to have my guest here today, Katina Rogers, the author of Putting the Humanities PhD to Work, Thriving in and Beyond the Classroom. Thank you so much for being here, Katina.
No, thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
It's so interesting how small the world is at times, right? I think you mentioned to me even when we corresponded that you'd seen me speak at CUNY, which has been some years ago now. Tell me where you were then and where you are now.
Sure. I've been in my position at the Graduate Center for 6 going on 7 years now. So at the time that I heard you speak, I had started in that role already. And I can't remember what year it was, but I was getting my feet under me, starting to understand better the really complex system of, CUNY. There's 24 interlocking graduate and undergraduate institutions and community colleges. It serves 500,000 students, 250,000 who are enrolled in degree-seeking programs, and another 250,000 who are engaging in continuing ed. And it just was really a massive system for me to try and get my arms around. I don't think that I had started writing the book in earnest yet at that point. And so a lot has changed since then. I mean, I think that the process of writing this book has given me an opportunity to think one level up about my own experiences and about the spaces in which I've worked and how I see those systems and structures, fitting together, not only in my story, but in many people's stories in and around higher ed.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that struck me as I was reading the book is you take the time to chronicle some really key steps. And even the language that you use around it, I think you say there are key career decision-making moments. And so let's talk a little bit about your trajectory, because we know that currently you're at CUNY and you have this role where you're really instrumental in looking at and thinking about and helping people prepare for, at a structural level, especially career diversity and career pathways. But let's talk about you and your steps along the way, because I think there's so much here as you dot and kind of chart connecting the dots, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find it really interesting to talk about this, actually. And I think it's because when I was going forward through this trajectory that I see myself on now, these steps didn't necessarily make sense to me. I mean, it was hard to see the through line. And as I look back, I think I can draw a really cohesive narrative around it, but it was just not true at the time that I was going through it. And I mention that because I think that sense of uncertainty is common for a lot of people. I mean, I feel like I was making the best decision I could at any particular moment, given whatever other constraints and desires were in place at that time. But I didn't necessarily know where I would be, a step after that or two steps after that. So I got my PhD in comparative literature from the University of Colorado at Boulder. I'm from Colorado originally. I've got my network of family and friends who are there. It was a great place to be. And while I was there, I worked, in addition to working as a teaching assistant, I worked part-time with a science organization called the International Union of Geodesy and Geophysics. It was felt like a very random position at the time. I was mostly in the job because they needed someone who spoke French. The official languages were French and English. I had none of the scientific knowledge whatsoever, but they needed the language skills. And I did that for a few years while working on my degree. I moved to New York, which was not a career decision, but my partner had work out here. I mentioned that because I think that's really one of the realities that people face on their journeys is, geography and people. And I was still finishing my dissertation when I was here. And the thing that became really interesting for me at that point is that I was no longer geographically located within my department. I wasn't with my cohort of peers. I wasn't with my advisor anymore. And in some ways that separated me a little bit from kind of the ambient stress of the department. And I felt like I was really able to focus on my own work and my own writing without a lot of the graduate school noise that I hadn't necessarily seen as a problem before, but when it was not there, I found I was really able to focus. I registered with a temp agency when I was in New York just because I didn't have the teaching income anymore and I needed something to bring in a paycheck while I was working. And that also was something that felt very haphazard at the time, but ended up opening up new possibilities for me. One of my placements was with the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, which makes grants in science and technology research. And that for me was really interesting. I had never seen grant making from the other side. I had never seen how proposals are evaluated, what happens before a proposal ever comes in the door, how the program directors talk about, the ideas they're interested in, the people that seem like they're doing promising work. I had never really thought about all of the structures around higher education that make a lot of the research possible. Yes. And I realized that in working there, even though my job there was purely administrative and really didn't, I think, tap into a lot of the skills that I had developed as a grad student, being there with people who had a deep commitment to scholarly work and a curiosity about the world, about subjects that were not their own necessarily, but a desire to understand how all of these different pieces fit together. It gave me a much broader view of what scholarly work can look like in a different type of atmosphere. And I found that I really liked it. There are lots of things about kind of a more structured office environment for work that suit me. And I found that I thrived there. I really enjoyed it. Through the network of people that I met in that position, because there were always, new prospective grantees coming in and out and people that we were in correspondence with for various reasons. And I was also getting more actively involved in Twitter and blogging at the time. I felt like that was a moment when my network was growing and I was able to reach out to people to do more informational interviews, to listen in on conversations that I thought were interesting, and to get a feel for like how people were talking about different questions that I wanted to understand better. From there, I eventually got a postdoctoral fellowship with the University of Virginia, where I understand you're an alum as well. I had such a great experience there. I was working remotely, but I was working in the Scholars Lab, which is in Alderman Library, with absolutely wonderful people. My supervisor there was Bethany Novisky, and I learned just a huge amount from her about what it looks like to lead in a really human and caring way, and what it looks like to to put people first, to let questions and inquiry drive the way that things are structured, and to not get too caught up in like the pace and the pressures of academic life. I felt like that was a very instrumental, it was just 18 months, but it was a really instrumental time for me. And that was also when I started doing research on career preparation, that I was doing a survey of people with advanced degrees in the humanities and the kinds of career preparation that they felt that they had received as part of their PhD program directly, and also what they felt like they learned as a doctoral student without it necessarily being a part of the curriculum, and then what they had to learn once they were on the job. These are all people who are working outside of faculty positions. And that research is what eventually grew into the book several years later. But I found in doing that there were a few things that I found really interesting. One was that I also was doing research on what the employers of these people thought about their career preparation, what the characteristics were that they thought they brought to the workplace, what was valuable, what they needed to learn. And the strongest disconnect in those responses was around research skills. And I thought that was so interesting.
Because I have a theory about this, just based on coaching people with doctoral degrees and master's degrees as well. The idea that students will hear from faculty members, well, you can do a lot of things with a PhD, organizations and companies need research, but then also looking on the employer side, and then, myself having worked alongside foundation, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in the past, like I understand the different ways that research happens and like the disconnect between what we're taught in graduate school and what is actually used out in the world to create answers and solutions and to explore questions more deeply. So what is that disconnect in those skill sets? And the reason why I highlight this is because research is our core skill set.
Yeah.
Right? Above all the other things, that is our core skill set. And this is me coaching people from Ivy League institutions, ones that, you can just imagine the names and the letters behind them, to also public institutions. It does not matter. It's not a prestige question. The training around research methodologies is, in my view, not, at least for, let me back up, maybe social sciences and humanities, does not meet the standard of what industry or nonprofit or philanthropy is looking for often.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think that what is meant by research is very different. And what I found was that people who had been the former graduate students, people who were employed in different places, felt like their research skills were not something that they used on the job at all. And their employers, on the flip side, thought that one of the most important skills that they brought to the job was their research skills. And so what that told me was that the former graduate students were using research skills that were highly valued by their employer and just not seeing that as research because it wasn't leading to the same product. It wasn't leading to a paper or a book or a conference talk or anything like that. It might have been leading to, an organizational decision or a new pursuit within the company, a hiring decision. We're using like these skills of landscape research and synthesis and analysis all the time. But I think sometimes it's hard to see the connection because we can become very used to seeing research as being one particular thing.
And perhaps also, because now I see some of the distinction in how you initially started and where I thought you were going. It also may be the depth and time right, spent on it, right? So when I think about research, even like, let's say what may be happening in like public health circles and statistical analysis and surveys and things like this, maybe longer range studies or large N studies, or as an ethnographer myself, kind of, the depth of study, how much time we spend investigating questions, asking, and then following back up again, and all of these things, observation, right? I can see how one would feel like their research skills aren't used if it doesn't look like that Although that critical analysis and surveying, and I don't mean that in like survey methodology sense, but surveying the landscape of an issue, right? A needs assessment or just a lookout over an issue and having critical analysis over it, even if you never had to go to EBSCO search or journals, you're still employing this methodology in ways that are real time and valuable.
Yeah. And I mean, the reverse can also be true too. And I think this might have been what you were hinting at, that people can come in thinking that they have all those research skills, but what the company might need is something that is a quick turnaround and, more of a shallow skim than the kind of long, extended, deep dive of research that they're accustomed to. And so, yeah, I think that there can be, a little bit of a mismatch in definitions and expectations. But I think that one of the things that is sometimes hard to remember in the environment of grad school, where everybody is operating at such a high level of, research and writing skills in particular, is that those skills are not generalized among everyone, and that when you go out among a general pool of candidates for a job or whatever, that those are things that often really set someone apart if they've done some graduate education, not even necessarily finishing, a PhD, but that the kind of focus and effort and intention that graduate study and graduate research instill in people is really unusual and is something that is really, really valuable.
So let's go there and talk a little bit about skills. I think this is one of the areas that I most find of challenge for, I'll even go as far as to say any advanced degree holding career changer, because I feel like once we get to that advanced degree level, we tend to be very siloed, or at least we are very clear about where our skills come from and clear about how they're used in the context within which we learn them and deploy them. But then when it's time to look out, maybe your interests change, desire for where you want to be, the geography changes, or, circumstances because of just job market impacts your decision, whatever it may be. When called upon to explore a bit more broadly, I find that it can be a challenge to understand transferable skills. And I almost want to take the language off the table, because I think when we say it, it almost assumes that there's a knowledge of what those core skills are for the individual. So we can give you a list of them, right? I can give you a list of them, but until you see yourself right, or see yourself broadly, or even see what you've been doing in a context of more universal language, that can be a very tricky moment that stalls people. I mean, we can't even get to updating your LinkedIn or writing a resume until you can truly capture and understand your skills. And then do something with them, right? Transfer them, communicate them, relay them, whatever it may be. So could you say something about, the skills of the advanced degree holder, the PhD in particular, and this recognition or inventorying of skills that needs to happen?
Yeah, I definitely see some of that. I don't want to call it resistance exactly, but there's a little bit of friction in thinking about skills and in the language that's used in particular. I have started talking about skills more in terms of translation than in terms of transferable skills. I've been finding that it's useful to have people think about, these are the things that I have worked hard on, that I'm proud of, whether it's a dissertation or teaching or, whatever the things are that they want to emphasize. And then just like you might do if you were trying to write for an unfamiliar audience, someone who doesn't necessarily know your work or doesn't necessarily know your field, understanding that audience's perspective is the first step. So like looking at a job ad and, treating it as a text. I come from a literary background, so that's my bias.
There.
Look at it as a text and try to see what is being said, what is not being said. there's a lot of desire in a job ad. What is it that they seem to want? The way that gets articulated may or may not line up exactly with your skills. But if you can understand a little bit of the psychology of what they're looking for, what need they're trying to fill, then you can think about what you've done and how you would be able to meet that need. And I think that customization gets talked about a lot. How do you customize your cover letter for every job or whatever? But I think the first step is really understanding the audience. So that's where I tend to think about translation. I also tend to think about graduate education and the skills of graduate education as being something like a lens or an approach, something that like brings a person into different questions in a particular way. And it might mean that like in some cases you're using a particular methodology. In some cases it might be, like I was saying, a way of looking at a text or a certain kind of curiosity. What I find coming from a humanities background is we ask a lot of questions, for one thing, and I think that's true across a lot of fields. I was recently in a conversation with a bunch of humanities scholars and technologists, and I was really struck by the ways that the humanities folks would sort of pick something up and just look at every angle and ask questions of themselves and of their peers, think about unintended consequences. And I think that that kind of approach, looking at things from every angle, thinking about what the implications are. It can be hard to articulate that in, resume language skills. Mm-hmm. But having those approaches in mind, having those methodologies in mind, and then looking to understand what is this job ad asking for? What do they seem to want? What is the need that they're trying to fill? I find that it's in bridging those two things, that sense of, of lens or approach and the sense of what the audience is. So that's where I've found translation, like a sense of more of like a bridge than just a transfer. Like transfer gives me a sense that I have this skill and I can pick it up from here and plug it in over there. And I don't think it usually looks like that. I might not be drawing on my content knowledge. I might not be drawing on the particular way that I would do research, but there are many other things that might only emerge once I'm actually in the job as things that are strengths specifically from the PhD.
Mm-hmm. You said something I want to highlight here as well that I also read in the book. It's very subtle, but it's so important. You talk about the different positions that you've had and your walkthrough. And I just want to say for the listeners too, that your book is not just your story. It just happens that I'm an ethnographer by training. So I really love personal story and narrative. So your narrative wrapped around this larger discussion of structural issues in the humanities as well as in grad education in general. It just helps to anchor the narrative. So I'll just say that so that the listeners don't get the idea that it's just your personal story in the book. But I think it's so instructive. There's so many things in here that are important. But one, you talked about how moving through these different roles, you started to see and started to develop a bit more of an online presence for yourself. And I think you even used the language of semi-professional online presence, or like, which to me, I translated as I am not here, trying to get a PhD in personal branding, but I am using this tool to communicate who I am and also to meet other people with similar interests. Industry language for that is personal branding, right? It's terminology used, but I want to say a little bit about this and really break down for people how you engaged in these different online forums and what, if any, were your objectives while doing so.
Yeah. So first, I would say that I think the internet is not the same place that it was when I first started, exploring Twitter. That was probably like 2009 or so. And it's not the same environment. That said, I do still think there's a lot of utility and also sometimes joy that can come out of the relationships that are fostered there. I started blogging, and I did that because I wanted to have an outlet to be writing about literature. Actually, I was wrapping up my dissertation at that point, or I guess I had finished it. And I wasn't sure at that point what kinds of connections I was going to retain with that part of myself. I had decided not to pursue faculty jobs, and I still really loved reading. So I just was writing blog posts about books that I had read, basically. And then as I was working at Sloan, I started using Twitter to get to know different prospective grantees, just to kind of listen in. There were certain program areas that the foundation was interested in expanding into, particularly one that they were calling digital information technology, that was really like a scholarly communication program. And because it was an entirely new program, they had a lot of groundwork to do to get a sense of who were the leaders in the field, who was driving the conversation, what were the core questions. And for me, having a project like that to kind of ground my presence there really helped, because I'm an introvert. In some ways, the internet is like great for people like me, because I can lurk and listen in without necessarily engaging all the time. But I prefer to have a purpose or a goal. So for me, I lived in on a lot of scholarly communication conversations, and that was how I really started to realize just how interesting I found these conversations, for one. And I was pretty intentional about it. I would follow people kind of in a web. So I would follow someone whose name I knew, and then follow people that they were following or that I saw them engaging in conversation with when I saw a topic that struck my interest. It took me a while to start jumping into those conversations, but eventually I did. And I found that like having spent some time listening first helped me to feel more like I understood the language, I understood the norms, because I think those vary not only by medium, but also by like subgroup within a space. And then I used it to meet people in person too. I used it, I hadn't been to any academic conferences for a couple of years. And then when I decided I was ready to look for the next position, I decided to go back to the MLA convention. I used Twitter really intentionally to try and set up some coffee dates with people beforehand. I kept an eye on the Twitter stream to see what was happening. And it was a time when it was, I think, a little bit easier to do that and not feel like it was a huge risk. I also want to acknowledge, though, that now, Twitter is where I'm most familiar, but this is true of other spaces as well. The risk of online engagement is not evenly distributed. And I think, women tend to face much more harassment online than men. Women of color do much more than white women. And I think that there is caution is definitely warranted in how you approach and engage with a medium for the first time. So yeah, I feel like it was possible for me to go in a little bit naive at that point in ways that I'm not sure would be as advisable now. But it was really for me a great way to get to know people. And some of the people that I met in those first years are still people that I would consider friends now.
Hi there. I don't know about you, but by this point in the year, I am looking for a break. Listen, we have made it almost to the end of 2020. We only have somewhere between 60 to 30 days left in the year, and it's been an intense one, right? Listen, now is the time for us to take a bit of a deep breath, to get our bearings so that we're not running and gunning through the holidays, but instead we can actually take a pause from all that this year has been and then begin to look forward to next year and think about how we want to take our learnings, lessons from this year into the new year. For many of you, this has been a season of meeting new demands around work, around caregiving, around schooling of your children, around socializing in new ways, traveling in new ways, or sitting at home in new ways than you have ever done in the past. And so I really wanted to create an experience for you and for me as well, where we get a chance to have a bit of wellness as well as planning. And so I've created the Genius Retreat. The Genius Retreat is a 2-day wellness and planning retreat that will help high achievers like you and me to reflect, renew, and refocus for 2021. And so what does this look like? Over the course of 2 days, you will join me and a list of amazing speakers as well as wellness practitioners who are going to help us to decompress a bit from 2020, reflect a bit on the lessons that we've learned, the things that we want to carry forward into 2021, and then begin to plan what we would like the beginning of the year to look like for ourselves. I know that many of you are balancing some decisions around your career, whether it looks like shifting jobs or starting a side hustle, or even working on a big writing project that you want to be able to complete come 2021. And so my goal is that the Genius Retreat will do a combination of cocooning you, giving you the space to get away, giving you the space to put a pause in all that's going on around you, and then give you space to be able to think about how you would like to enter into the new year. Most of you already have some sort of planning practice that you do for yourselves. And so what I would like to usher you into is my vision setting process, as well as 90-day goal setting process that will help you to set goals with ease and with grace. We all know that 2021 is just going to look a little bit different. We've seen what 2020 gave us, and now it's time to adjust the ways that we do our normal practice. So it very well may be that the ways that you have tended to plan for your year is not really going to work for this upcoming year. And so I'd like for you to join me for the Genius Retreat as I walk you through the process that will help you to complete some of the things that are on your list, and also to honestly pare down some of the things that are on your list. And so join me for the Genius Retreat. You can find out more about our speakers, more about the wellness practitioners that will be joining us, and even about the amazing gifts that I will be giving you for everyone who registers. So you can go to thegeniusretreat.com to find out more information. I can't wait to see you in December. One of the things I'm hearing as you chart your story is also the time frame of things. I think sometimes in this part of the work that I do with job seekers, and even the language is interesting for me because I often wonder, am I working with people who are truly job seekers, or are they on some point in their path of career discovery where often they're not just like, I'm ready to get a job tomorrow, right? But what I want to pull out in your example is you're describing sort of a pathway and trajectory that's happening over time. There wasn't this kind of, I'm not hearing a sort of a, oh my gosh moment, I really need this new thing. It is, I am in a state of exploration and consistent curiosity, even as I have the role that I'm in. I cannot stress enough how important that is to remain curious and to be doing this social listening. One thing that I tell people is, you want to start before you need it. Right? Because then you're coming into relationships you've already built authentically.
Yes.
And you're not forcing a relationship because you desperately need a job in the next month. Right?
Yeah. And you don't know what possibilities are going to unfold either. I mean, I feel like there have been times when I've gone into something with one idea in mind and something very different has happened, and it's been really interesting, and lots of new possibilities have opened up from there. But if I had gone in not open to something unexpected, then I never would have seen it. And that was actually true with this job, with the job at CUNY. I was not looking to change jobs at that point. But by that point in my career, I had built up, more of a network. I knew more people. There were more people that I had worked closely with. And when the program that I'm a part of now, the Futures Initiative, was getting started, somebody thought of me and gave my name to the person who was hiring, my boss and the founder, Kathy Davidson. And it was a tough choice, actually. I don't know that I've ever talked about this particular piece of it, but I had a 6-month-old baby at the time. I was really not looking to change jobs. I had just recently come back from parental leave. It was not a time when I wanted to jump into something new with both feet. And at the same time, was really intriguing to me. And it would bring me back closer to working with graduate students, working in a university now that I felt like I had sort of gathered a lot of ideas and practices from different places and would have a chance to actually build a program and implement them. And so I decided to give it a try. And that, I think I would really agree that curiosity is something that has been such an important part of my pathway. It's certainly something like, I don't know, I feel like I have a lot of agency in my career pathway, even though I haven't necessarily said like, okay, this is my 10-year plan and here's how I'm going to go about it. Being able to sort of move fluidly like that has really helped me to feel like I'm able to pursue the opportunities as they arise and pursue the things that really catch my interest.
Yeah, it sounds to me too like the agency actually comes through your active participation,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we can often just move through these processes and, do them in a way that we're just following the next thing because it's in line next.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like you've been intentional about just checking in with yourself. What do you need?
Mm-hmm.
What's working? What's not working? And that's not just in the terms of work. Like you said, your partner had an opportunity in New York and you made a choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was a choice to choose. I will be able to find something there. I will be happy and holistically choose, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's another thing that's really key is I hear people with their decision making often reducing their decisions down to this kind of compartmentalized view of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love, it's small here on your book, but the subtitle starts with thriving, thriving in and beyond the classroom. And, I'm sure that there was lots of choices that went into the title of the book, but for me, thriving is a key word. It's something that I try to instill in myself and also just transmit and share with my audience is that, we can choose thriving. It doesn't mean we always know what the next step looks like, but you can make a choice that then at least gives you pathways to then at least know that you're on your choice-making path, right? But one thing I'd love to hear you speak about in this regard, and I get this question a lot, but I don't really feel like it's not my area of work and I don't deal with this particularly, but how this kind of career pathways discussion becomes unique when we talk about scholars of color, first generation scholars. Where is the discussion around diversity and equity in the career pathways conversation and just kind of structural work as you see it?
Thank you for asking about this. This is what I think is the most important part of the book, actually. And this is what I hope to continue with going forward. I think that sometimes the conversation around careers and career preparation doesn't always engage deeply with the structural issues in the academy. And I think that includes labor structures, the increasing reliance on adjunct labor and the nature of those positions and the precarity that it leaves people in. The ongoing issues related to bias in the academy and representation. I mean, I think one of the things that I think is really important in this discussion is that there's a sense underneath all of this of what constitutes success. And I think part of the question is who decides what does success look like? And without addressing that question, it's a deep values question and norms related question. Without addressing that, you can do as much as you want with the programming on top. But if the values are still the same, conservative in many cases values, then those initiatives on top are not going to bring about deeper change. And I see this a lot with diversity initiatives in universities. And I'm also really influenced by Sarah Ahmed's work on this. Her book on Being Included is really great on this because what she notices is that as soon as an institution starts talking about diversity work often stops. The fact that they have created a committee or written a white paper or whatever the case may be means that they have addressed whatever problem with diversity they're having at their institution, and they're done. And people who try to dig in deeper than that are seen as creating trouble or stirring the pot, and they often find themselves running into a brick wall. I've been thinking about that brick wall image as a place where an institution's stated values and its implicit values are colliding, because most institutions now would say that they value diversity. But when you look at the structures of graduate admissions and recruitment, when you look at the structures of tenure and promotion, when you look at how dissertations are structured or exams are structured, they rely on the same types of a prestige-driven economy that the academy has always used. And so if you're admitting graduate students who you think are most likely to succeed in this particular narrow vision of success, then even if you say, well, we know the GRE scores are biased, so we're not going to weigh too much on the GRE scores, we're going to look at things holistically, but you're still looking for someone who has most likely had all of these privileges coming into their graduate education application. So people from a particular educational pedigree, people usually coming from higher socioeconomic background, and often white people, because that's, how the systems and structures are aligned. So if that's the vision of success, then you end up always bringing in the same types of people and expecting them to succeed in the same type of way, and then saying, actually, could you do something really innovative? And it doesn't work that way, or people get to the end of their graduate career and you say, maybe if you just learn to code, then you'll be able to get a different type of job. And it feels like the rug has been pulled out because those values have not been a part of the underlying system. They're layered on top. So what I've been thinking about in terms of equity and diversity and inclusion in the academy and how that connects with careers is what I've been seeing at CUNY in particular is students who have the most incredible deep commitments to various communities in and around the university. People who have held full-time jobs for a long time and are coming back to graduate school to go deeper in an area that they really care about. People who have been organizers in their communities and who, depending on the department, some people feel they have to leave that to the side, that the educational space is one thing and that their organizing experience or their community experience is something else. What I think would be really powerful is if the academy could find a more spacious understanding of success that sees the potential of impact of the kinds of research and training that graduate students do in a societal sense, not just in, a research paper kind of sense, but in something that's much broader and has a much more diffuse potential impact. Then I think you start to see people who might not have thought that the academy had a space for them or would be a space where they could thrive, would be a space where they would be welcome. And often people are often right about those senses, that they often are coming into a space that's a hostile environment. And so I think that, cracking open some of those value structures and really both, first of all, looking to see what they are and understanding them as a thing that is there and not just the way things have to be. And then also thinking about how they could be different. I think that opens up space so that we can talk about career pathways, but we can talk about the full cycle of what we think graduate education does and why it matters in the world.
This is so smart from a number of different angles. I feel like, and it's no accident, I think you being at CUNY, having these kinds of discoveries and conversations just because of CUNY's mission in New York and in New York City in particular, and such the diversity of like the kinds of things that people are doing who come into a space like CUNY. And just to imagine a world where the things that we're researching and the researchers themselves, the work that's being done on the ground, whether that's in a grassroots organization, community organizing, civil service, right? All of these different levels, doesn't matter, but where they're informed by and created by people who are actively mobilizing that information, and kind of bringing down some of this elitism that happens in the academy enough to allow for, one, practice, right? Because that's
Mm-hmm.
where elitism comes in as well. It's not just pedigree, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also practice versus praxis, so thinking versus doing, I feel like is often what happens in the academy as well. So I really appreciate this discussion. And I think there's a lot that the academy has to do. And, in a speculative way, I just think about, well, what does the current moment that we're in with COVID and its shifts or impact on higher education, just thinking about what that might do for the future of higher education. I think it'll be interesting to see this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely been a moment where a lot of things changed really rapidly in ways that I think people would not have thought possible even a couple of weeks prior.
Yes.
And that to me, it's been terrible. But it also does create some possibilities to rebuild differently. It makes it very clear that some of the structures do not have to be the way that they are, and that we could think about them differently. And the other thing that I think is really has been really important to think about for me right now is that as we've seen, so I'm in New York, and in March, as the pandemic was really hitting hard, and when we knew a lot less about the virus, we were seeing immediately, Black and brown communities hit so much harder than wealthier and wider communities. We were seeing all of these intersections of race and poverty and healthcare access and educational access being really laid bare in terms of who was being affected, who was fleeing the city versus who was staying. We saw it in, were garbage pickups increasing and decreasing. And I think that in addition to really needing, the scientific inquiry and to trust the science, we also really were in a moment where the humanistic and social science lenses were incredibly important to understand what were the historical reasons that we had gotten to this point, what were the social structures that had made it so that, you could map different variables on a map and see that, the ways that, again, like race and poverty would intersect with the infection rates. And it's not a mystery that there's reasons why this has unfolded in the way that it has. And I think that we really need people who are trained in that scholarship and trained in those intersections to be at the front of the conversation, and helping to drive some of the public health decisions.
Mm-hmm. As we wrap the discussion, perhaps you can share with me, I'm curious on a very pragmatic level, how you managed to write this book while also doing the other things that you do in your daytime job, being a partner, being a mom to 2 small children. How did you practically make time for that? And I'll say too why I'm asking, because a lot of our listeners are just that. They're scholars, professionals, faculty members, leaders in their companies or organizations. And they also are brilliant people who are creating other work on the side, often which it's research or books. So practically speaking, how did you create the context or container for yourself to be able to develop this project while those other things were happening?
I am someone who likes to write a little bit at a time. I think when the project was going most smoothly was when I spent even just half an hour every morning, first thing, working on it. Once I get into my day, it's really hard for me to pull back out mentally and be in the right space to work on it. But I'm very much, a creature of habit. I do well with kind of disciplined time. And so that is a method that works well for me. I've been reading a book recently called Air and Light and Time and Space by Helen Sword that I really like because she talks about the different approaches that people have naturally to writing and ways to kind of discern that and amplify it and work with it instead of, if you're someone who needs a big block of time, those daily bits are not going to work very well for you. But I did that. I also negotiated in my current position to have one day a week before, in the before times when I was working from home, which meant that I was able to protect some time from meetings. And I often am giving talks and things like that for my job. And I always tried to work in something of whatever I was working on intellectually into whatever I was talking about programmatically. And I'm lucky that they align. So it hasn't been a stretch to do that. But yeah, working on things a little bit at a time. I will not say it was easy. I mean, I remember getting the first readers' reports a few days before giving birth to my second child, Siva, who's now 3.5. So it was a long process from start to finish, and it's been really interesting for me on a personal note to see, like, you know, the growth of my kids alongside kind of my own career and intellectual path. But I think, to return to something that you said, like focusing on that curiosity and letting things unfold naturally has been really valuable for me. And at a certain point, when it started to feel like a book, I already had a lot of content there. And I find now that as I'm around talking about this book, my mind is starting to move on to new things. I'm thinking a lot about joy and sustainability and how that might look in a moment like what we have now. So I don't know what form that will take, but I think just giving myself permission to explore some ideas without necessarily having a goal yet has been really important for me.
It's so interesting you say this, because I mean, I couldn't have planned it any better, but similarly, toward September, I just started reflecting on some of the things that I was hearing in my coaching and my own thoughts and kind of sentiments around, how do I want to wrap up this year? What do I want it to look like? I mean, typically around the third quarter of the year, which is fairly early, but I start thinking about the next year. And quite frankly, that's something I do just as a product of being an entrepreneur. I'm kind of looking ahead and always trying to make sure I'm also creating space for myself personally while I'm also thinking about the business and where I want it to go. And just a very unlikely idea came to me. And now what it's turned into is what we are calling the Genius Retreat. But it really was born out of, I just wanted to create a space for smart people to just slow down. Because I think in the pandemic, especially with March being that push and that like figuring it out and what are we doing? And then a somewhat of a easing in or settling in after summer around August, and people realizing, oh, we're going to be here for a while, but already feeling burnt out. It's like, what can I do to just help us all feel taken care of? I mean, truly, that was my genuine interest. It's like, I feel like the high achievers among us are still trying to operate at the same level of productivity and progress and meetings and, turning over work. And I'm like, but we're not in precedented times. And that's not to say that we have to drag through them or drag through this moment, but how do we recognize it? Honor ourselves as people who are creative and who are, in the middle of projects that are important to us, but still balance that with our own humanity. I know that I won't stop planning because that's just who I am. That's how I'm built. I'm going to look the next few months ahead or the year ahead. And so how do we do that? And so hearing you say that, thinking about joy and how to create that, I'm interested to see where your work goes, because I'm excited about where, at least at this small moment, mine has taken me. I mean, I never would have thought that I was a bit nervous about this being a virtual retreat. I'm like, I actually don't want people tied to their computers and I don't want it to feel like that for people. But what it did is it made me and my team also be creative about, okay, well, how can we make this feel amazing for people and give them breaks and give them yoga sessions and, and also just like true breaks. Like, no, we're not going to talk at this time. We're not going to do anything. There's no homework. There's just go off and explore and we'll come back with our next session. It moved us to a space of creativity to figure out how to do that in this kind of form with the resources that we have, obviously. But I'm excited to see where your curiosity takes you next.
Yeah, likewise. That sounds amazing. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and it's great to end on a note of hope and thriving and caring for one another. I mean, I think that's where we are. That's what we've got right now. So it's great to talk with someone who shares a like-minded view of that.
I'm so glad you've been on today, and I can just see other things in the future, and just us being resources for each other.
Absolutely.
I'm super excited about your book, and I hope that people pick it up and look at it for all the things I didn't get to, but that are still here and still amazing and quite helpful for people along their way. So thank you so much for being with us, Katina.
It was really a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us this week on Gradschooled. Follow me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram at Katina PhD for more info on this episode and other professional development topics. As always, subscribe to the show and leave us a review so we can continue to bring you the topics you want most. See you next episode.